And we are live. Welcome to episode
Downward.
28 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast, recorded July 10th, 2019. My name is Ian, and I live on a small hobby farm. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, sport shooter, reloader, and field officer for the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights, and also my farm's designated handyman. Eric has lost all interest in being prompt, as he tends to prioritize actual work over hosting an unpaid podcast.
I mean, I do too, but here I am. I'm Alan. My friends and family call me a safety nerd. My background as a first responder helped me develop a mind for safety. I teach first aid, coach my family and friends to be better prepared. I'm a locksmith by trade. I've worked in the physical security industry for more than 20 years now.
All right, we have some high-rise content for you this episode, guaranteed to elevate your knowledge and provide some bird's-eye view on prepping. Is that too many dad jokes?
No such thing.
All right. We're going to start off with some news articles related to preparedness of the outdoors. Then we'll be letting you know how we've improved our preparedness since our last episode. Then we'll get into the main topic for this episode, which is prepping for condo life. News time. So for myself, I had a couple articles in here. Interestingly enough, the walleye fishery in Lake Winnipeg is under scrutiny. Once again, it seems that the government does not know how to manage a fishery. I know this may come as a shock.
Shocking.
Yeah. If the
Absolutely blown away that a bunch of people who've never fished are having a hard time managing a fishery.
So it turns out, just like the cod industry in Newfoundland, that it's gotten to the point where it's almost in collapse, and they're saying, "Hey, we should probably do something about this, and let's just restrict the commercial fishermen, and I don't know, we'll just put some arbitrary restrictions that might or might not help. We don't know." I read the article and I was kind of laughed. I was like, most of these people, just like hunters, know how to like maintain a sustainable fishery, and yet the government puts in these restrictions that make no sense whatsoever. And of course, it's only going to affect the local families. It's not going to actually fix the fishery. It's mind blowing to read some of these articles sometimes. But once again, I think my main point with this one was that a food source is never guaranteed, and if you could take it worldwide with the way that we don't really manage a worldwide ocean fishery, you never know when that food supply is going to collapse. So something to keep in mind.
That's a valid point to take away from that.
Yeah, I mean, like you look at some of these factory ships that are roaming the oceans nowadays, and they're not really managed per se, and they just randomly help themselves. So if they one day just can't get any more fish, then what, right? And they've already talked about that's the one food supply everybody's worried the most about. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the other one I was going to mention was cell coverage lost in various parts of Canada, including 911 services.
It
And what I
affected
found that
me.
yeah, what I found that interesting about that is that I think Eric even mentioned in the notes here that normally, even if you don't have a SIM card in the cell phone, you can still dial 911 normally. But that's a phone thing. Like, so the actual service providers, like the actual towers, were out, meaning that no matter what your phone had for a SIM card or not, you weren't going to be able to call 911 at all.
It's true.
Yeah,
A good
so
reminder that it's not a bad idea to keep a landline around. I know a lot of houses aren't even being built with them anymore, but have a landline that you can plug into your wall. Have your phone, like your house, connected to the phone lines, because even without service to your phone, you can still dial 911 if you can plug it into the wall.
yeah, and I just thought it was interesting the fact that that was the one of the few times we've heard about actual service outages being nationwide with the actual service provider.
Yeah, it's usually they're usually isolated pockets and they're usually pretty quick to resolve. But that one was I was traveling and my phone wouldn't connect to anything. I still had data coverage. I could still get texts, but I couldn't. I had no phone connectivity at all
Yeah,
for a
interesting.
couple of days actually.
Yeah, so I had one for you there as
Not that
well.
I ever actually call anyone, but it was a thing that happened. So
So one more, I
uh,
guess, eh?
yeah, the last article that we have up here is that we have a bunch of residents in Manitoba evacuated due to wildfires. That's in Little Grand Rapids, it looks like, and it's a um, it's the time of the year, right? We've got wildfires. We've got you've got a lot of people out there doing their best to make it to mitigate the damage, but um, you're going to have to be prepared to pack up and haul out if things go sour. And if if the wind shift, they can't control that fire, then you've got to be prepared to be gone.
Well, especially if
If
you're in
you
a
live in
town.
that,
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you're living in a town that doesn't have a road in or out, and the only way in and out is by air or boat, I mean, it might behoove you to have a well supplied or well I guess a well planned out evacuation route by a boat because I mean they had planes going in and out of there. I noticed on the article and they were only able to hold like 10 people at a time, and there's like 1,300 people in the village, so that's a lot of airplane trips in and out. So I mean
It's a
these
lot
people,
of aircraft in and out.
yeah, so these people are sitting there waiting to get evacuated, but they're waiting for like just dribs and drabs of people to get evacuated. So of course they were prioritizing, sick people, babies, older people and everything else first, but the rest of the people are
Yeah,
just sitting
women
around
and
going,
children first.
yeah. So the rest of the people are just sitting there going, hey, it'd be great if I could get out too. But and of course, I know up there, I mean, there's no shortage of river and water systems. At least you could be able to try and outrun some of the fires, or if you're in a bigger lake, like I'm not sure about Little Grand, but I know there's a river system that goes through it. You must be able to get downstream to
Hmm.
another town, right?
Well, I mean, water leads to somewhere, right? Even if not, even if all you can do is get out on the water, at least you're not going to catch fire.
Yeah, I just was fascinated that even with a pretty intensive rescue effort mounted, it still takes days and days and days to get everybody out of town, right?
Oh,
So
yeah, and I mean it's because you also have the limitations of the land itself, right? Because if you can only get a certain size of aircraft in, you can't just bring in a C-17 and land on the the short gravel runway that they've got there at Little Grand, load everybody up and take off all at once, which would be great. But I mean, if the runway doesn't accommodate it, I know when I flew in Northern Ontario on the air ambulance, we weren't allowed to have jets.
hmm
We had them, and then we had to drop down to the King Airs because the runways weren't long enough
yeah,
in some of these remote communities, and so we were severely limited by the size of aircraft that we could get in and out.
yeah, that totally makes sense. Awesome.
All right, so what have we done lately for preps, Ian?
All right, well, I'm gonna be a little chatty with this one, but here we go. So I started off. This has been, I think, 3 weeks since I've been on the podcast, so I had a bit of a build up here. So I met up with listener Raphael, and we managed to meet up and have a great little chat. And he joined our little discussion group, which was fantastic. Really nice guy, very interested in the preparedness aspect of things, and he's got some really good ideas to share. So that was neat.
Awesome.
Got saved by Vortex Optics. So I had a optic that I bought used off Canadian Gun Nuts, and I got for the first time in I don't know how long. I actually kind of got rooked. But just like Fiskars axes and Craftsman tools, Vortex Optics are great in the fact that they have a unlimited, unconditional lifetime warranty. Don't have to be the first owner. And so what happened was I sent in this optic saying, "Hey, this thing is like not working." And of course, the other guy didn't bother to mention that to me. But when it showed up, it wasn't working. So I sent it in, just asking for repair, and I offered to pay for everything, and they're like, "No, no, here you can just have a brand new one." And because they don't make that model anymore, we'll give you the new, better one that's worth about $200 more. So
Darn, hate it when
yeah,
that happens.
so to the guy that worked me on gun nuts, I have to say, because I managed to totally score a much better optic off them, and
Yeah, no kidding.
and so again, like I promised them I would, I have to give a shout out to Vortex Optics right now because they stand by their warranty and no questions
Fantastic.
asked,
Well,
right? And
well, that's great. That's great. I love hearing when companies actually go above and beyond to make it right. It's a rarity these days, and I'm glad that it happened.
well, and
What else you
especially when
got?
I fell on my sword, especially I right off the bat, I said, "Listen, not the first owner. This is what's happened," and they not even a hiccup. It was amazing. So, anyways, moving along, podcaster charity shoot. So, yeah, that was really awesome. In a couple words or less, and
Right
so
on.
base it was Dak and Drumheller as we mentioned before. Did a bit of a write up on this as well as we're going to see below here. So it was interesting for me from a preparedness perspective because it's the first time I've ever really worked on shooting under some very mild competitive pressure. But it was just neat to see some peers watching what you're doing and offering really good constructive advice or even just videotaping so you can watch yourself later, which was really neat. I attended a Stop the Bleed class, so that
Fantastic.
was
Great,
pretty
great
awesome.
class, eh?
Yeah,
Yep.
so Gavin from the other CPP, Canadian Patriot Podcast, was teaching that one. And interestingly enough, in the Stop the Bleed class was pretty much all the podcasters, as well as a couple other local guys, which was pretty cool. So that was the first time I'd met half the podcasters that I'm about to mention anyway.
Cool.
Um, yeah, so I mean, there's people from Slamfire Radio, New Shooter Canada, uh, ourselves, Canadian Patriot Podcast. And also the manager of the Armed Squirrels from the States. Actually, she was up here too, so that was kind of
Nice.
cool. So we had a really good exchange of ideas. Let's see here, what else was going on? Rod Giltaca was there from CCFR. We had Rob Furlong, for the longest time he had the world record longest kill shot in Afghanistan. And I
Yep,
don't know if you remember that, but anyways, there's
I
some
do. Like something
shenanigans.
like 2.5 kilometers or something.
Yeah, and so he was actually manning the 300-yard bench, which I thought was pretty cool. And
He could
so,
probably throw it more accurately than I could shoot at that range.
yeah, and the best part is he was offering, like, he was actually showcasing some of the rifles that he has a company that works with him, and he
Yep,
was, again, really outgoing, really approachable guy, fantastic. Anyways, and so yeah, lots of
awesome,
fun to be had. So moving along,
fantastic.
after I left the podcast show shoot, I went and visited my parents' acreage and checked out their little preparedness setup, which was kind of neat. But other than that, really, I've been working a lot, and that's why I missed the last couple of podcasts. So that's pretty much where I stand
Well,
there.
we almost missed you, so.
Almost. I'll stay away longer next time. That's fine.
For me, I spent last week driving. I loaded a truck with a bunch of camping gear and drove it to the East Coast. Learned a lot about actually bugging out with family, and being awake for almost 2 full days, and all of those good things. Um, Decided that I'm never going to listen to Google Maps again. It led me astray on 3 separate occasions. I'd come up to an intersection and it would say, turn right to go east, and I'm trying to go west, and it would take. So I figure, okay, well, I'll follow it because maybe it knows something I don't, and then it would say turn left, and then go around this road, and then go right and go west on this road. So it would literally just take me off on a tangent, just to bring me straight back to where I was. So
It did that to
um,
me. It did that to me a couple on the way out to the charity shoot. It did that to me right around Hope, where all the highways kind of converge at the end of Vancouver, and it actually worked me over, took me through the town of Hope for no reason, which I was like, that doesn't seem right, but I thought maybe it knew better. No, it didn't. And
yeah,
then,
no, it didn't. So
but on the way back, at the very same area, it took me off the highway, and I was like, I don't know. And it was kind of nearing rush hour, and sure enough, it saved me about 20 minutes of traffic because it basically looped me around a bunch of traffic, and then put me back on the highway ahead of it all. So I'm like,
so I guess
okay,
there's
so
that.
yeah, so it was good.
So yeah, that's a thing to work on. What else did I learn? I learned that it's important to invest in good lighting for your vehicle. So I was driving in rural New Brunswick at night, where there's nothing but bugs and moose, and I couldn't see a damn thing. There was no moonlight penetrating the trees. So good headlights are not enough when it comes time for your bug out vehicle, and we'll have an episode on that coming up at some point. When it comes time for your bug out vehicle, have good lighting so you can see as much around you as possible. The another thing I learned is that bug spray is an absolute necessity. There's just no option with that. Especially on the coast. I mean, there were. I'll put a picture up on my Instagram that I took after and the truck was literally just like covered in, you know, if it's not tens of thousands, I'd be shocked of dead mosquitoes from just driving through the bush. There's no such thing as too much bug spray, so that was something there. I was able to visit the family acreage, which I've decided is possibly my new go-to location. If the S really does hit the H, but F. But that's another thing. So it's a long haul from here to there. It was about 17 hours straight, and a lot of gas. So that's getting there. Getting there would be great, but getting there would be a huge challenge because I would have to go. There's no way to not do that while going through Toronto, unless I end up on some kind of large boat and I can take the St. Lawrence. But that's a different thing entirely. So my kids got to go put their feet in the Atlantic Ocean, and that was kind of cool. And that was my big thing, was learning how much I don't need on a road trip.
Yeah,
There was
well, that's interesting.
I packed a lot more than I needed to, and we were comfortable, but I could have done with a whole lot less.
Yeah, you made a good point too about like a 17-hour trip. You mentioned you might need some strategic fuel caches along the way too,
Absolutely.
if that was actually the case. But
Well, yeah, because there's just by mileage. The truck that I was in gave me a range of about 1,000 kilometers. and that's about 1,600 kilometers if I drive it straight. So no matter what, I'm going to need 2 tanks of gas. Probably, realistically, I would need 3. So figuring out how to find those reserves along the way if gas pumps aren't working anymore. That would be my challenge. So that's something to work on for me. That's going to become part of the plan.
Cool. All right, well, it's time to move on to the main topic of the show. Right off the hop, I guess we should talk about the fact that it's tough love time here. Apartment prepping, it's just not sustainable long term, right? I think you
No,
probably.
long term, I agree with you 100%. It's it's there's so many drawbacks, but I think for short term, it's probably better than being in a house in an urban area.
Yeah, I think you're right because like I think most of my notes here are going to focus more on short-term emergencies, like under a month without power or heat. But
Yep, absolutely.
like I think you're going to mention down below the heat aspect, but I mean right off the bat, OPSEC. So it's my pet peeve with I'm actually broadcasting from an apartment right now, so it works out well. Um, you know, as a stopover spot for the charity shoot and everything else, I mean, I had to rush stuff in and out to make sure that the neighbors don't see because it's from a theft perspective slash neighborhood concern perspective, everything else you gotta kind of sneak stuff in and out, and it's just like
Yep, absolutely.
it's not cool. I wish I didn't have to do that, but unfortunately, the society we're in nowadays, you kind of have to because if somebody sees you carting in I'm just saying, jerry cans or propane tanks or guns or ammo or anything that looks like non-standard in society, people are going to like raise an eyebrow, right?
Absolutely, and it definitely takes away from being the gray man if you're the guy that has it's always bringing in boxes of whatever, boxes of
Yeah,
cans, boxes of yeah,
and
and
even like
there's no way. Like I lived in apartments when I was younger, and there's no way to avoid people seeing it. Everybody knows what everybody's doing.
yeah, and even like so you can't have a truck. Certainly, out of the gray man theory, you don't want to have a truck with the CCFR stickers and the buck mark and everything else on your truck because that's
Yeah,
not going to help either. But like I was just thinking what's happened to my apartment lately. So this is actually kind of funny because you're going to get a kick out of this, but. Access to the apartment by the landlord, which is a regular thing. So you want to make sure that what you have is kind of like on the down low. Strata
yep,
people, like repair guys coming in to fix a toilet while you're not there or whatever, which they can enter if there's a water leak or whatever. So you better have
yep,
your stuff squared away while you're gone. But here's where it came in funny because one of my neighbors actually left a pot on the stove, so it caused a bunch of smoke. And what happened about 3 months ago was the fire alarm went off. And even though it was like the fire alarm for a different apartment was indicating that different apartment, the firemen
yep.
came in and take those big, what do they call those, Halley tools or Hall
Halligan bar. Yep,
Halligan bar. Anyways, and then of course they just ripped right through the deadbolts and
yep.
bent the metal frames of the door, which are nice solid metal frames, and just basically split the door right open so they could kick the door down. But they went through 4 apartments before they found the one that was actually on fire. And it wasn't even like when I say on fire, I mean just smoking heavily. But anyway, so the problem is that even if it's by accident, they don't mean to go into your place, they might. And
Yep.
if you have anything that looks bizarre,
Well, there's also a good chance that they did it on purpose so that if there was a fire, when they got to that apartment, they A, had an area of refuge for themselves, and B, they knew where people were to evacuate.
yeah.
So there's a good chance they actually did it on purpose. Um, but there's also an equal chance that they didn't know which unit to go into, and
They
um,
just got excited or something.
I'm not gonna lie, it's fun breaking down doors. So
Yeah. So I mean, so it's just a constant concern for making what you have stored less conspicuous, and it doesn't have to be anything like crazy like guns or ammo. I'm just saying food, water, whatever. But
yeah,
anyway,
absolutely.
so the other thing that I run into when I was thinking about here is like fuel storage restrictions. So like we have a
Yep,
barbecue here and a propane tank and stuff, but there is strata restrictions on having jerry cans, propane bottles, either
sure.
fire code or strata restrictions that says what you
Well, I
can't.
think fire code says you can't take flammables in an elevator.
Yeah. So
Which I don't think has ever stopped anybody in the history of the world. But that's like if you follow the rules, then you gotta hump that stuff up the stairs.
yeah.
And my first apartment was on the 16th floor. My second apartment was on the 25th floor, and I did those stairs up once, and that was enough.
Yeah, and so I mean, like even if you have
Uh,
a couple jerry cans sitting on a deck, just because you might
yeah,
have a generator there or whatever, sure the neighbor's gonna complain, right? And that's a
absolutely.
problem.
Yeah, and I mean, building code is one thing, but the rules of a condo corporation are something entirely different, and the chances are really good that even if there's no law prohibiting such things, that the condo corporation rules of being a good neighbor, which are so broad that they give the condo corporation almost limitless power within within the facility, um, which is another pet peeve. But that's a rant for the other CPP. Uh, but they um, yeah, they can say, it's, you've got all these jerry cans, but you're creating a hazard, you're creating an unpleasant environment, you're creating whatever. Get rid of it,
Yeah.
and you don't have a choice. It goes.
And so, depending on the construction of your apartment, of course, too, is like, it's great for like a month's worth of food and water. But if you have like a whack of food and water around your apartment, having the space for it is one thing, but even the weight of it, like some depending on how your apartment's built, if it's a wood frame, maybe it can't support the weight
Yep.
of like a water bob or anything else around the even a couple big water tanks. I mean, it might start cracking wood. I mean, it depends on how crappily your
It
apartment
could,
is
yeah,
built.
absolutely. It could very well. So yeah, it's certainly a consideration. I mean, most apartments are designed for like ridiculous load levels, but that's assuming you're living in a condo that was built to code and hasn't been altered, and you've got a solid concrete floor. I lived in an apartment above a business on Main, like a small town in Main Street. The building was 100 years old and everything was wood framed. So if I tried to make things any heavier than they were, then there's definitely a challenge going on there. So
Yeah.
um,
So I mean, we had
definitely some limitations there.
oh yeah, and so I mean, like, we're just talking limitations first, but there's also some advantages too. Alternative heat solutions can be an issue, but it also can actually be helpful because I think you had a couple points below there as well. But so I mean, what we had here is we have radiant like hot water heat, and of course, lo and behold, the boiler went out a couple of years ago there, and yeah, so what happened was, if you didn't have electric heater, well, you're out of luck. So I ended up
Yep.
at the time we didn't have one until the landlord brought one over here, but we ended up having wool being our best friend, so wool toques, wool blankets, you know, and
Sure.
everything else
Yeah.
because it doesn't take long, even in the mild climate of Vancouver here. It doesn't take much before it's like, yeah, it's pretty frigid in January still, and you want to make sure you have some sort of alternate heat source, even if it's just wool or heavy blankets or some sort of
Well,
insulating material.
and having enough space blankets to reflect to keep your heat back in, right?
Yeah.
Um, which is another thing to do. And yeah, you're right that solar, and your point about the solar makes sense too. You've got most One of the advantages of an apartment is that you're up nice and high, so you've got most apartments will have a couple of hours, at least a few hours a day, where you're in full sun. So a good deployable solar panel system would be excellent for charging batteries and generating heat and whatever.
Yeah, so I mean, like the advantage of an apartment, I think at this point is that if you do have an electric heater and you're only like staying in one little room, it takes zero energy really to get that heater going and heat up the whole room to an acceptable
Yep.
level because it's not a huge space and because your neighbors below will probably have some sort of heating system, they're going to give you some
Yep.
radiant heat from below as well. I did mention, yeah, the solar. So if you have a south-facing window, it doesn't take much to put up a tiny little panel to run a little battery system if you want to just
But
keep your
not even
phone
south. I
charged.
mean, anything other than north, you're going
Yeah.
to get at least a few hours a day of daylight,
Yeah,
of direct sunlight. Yep.
even if it's just enough to charge your phone and give you some basic light with an LED light. But
Yep.
of course, with that OPSEC thing coming into play again, if it runs into a longer emergency, you want to have some blackout curtains to make sure nobody else knows at night that you have a light, and maybe potentially
Exactly.
more stuff, right?
You don't want to stand there. When I lived in an apartment, I worked nights, so I had like serious blackout curtains, and to the point where I would even put like wrap cardboard in like a solar blanket that was fit tight to the window, so it would reflect the heat back out.
Yep.
Um, but you don't want to be doing that unnecessarily either, because um, if you end up with if you end up changing things when things go south, then you end up you know creating a more visible image as opposed to staying low key.
Yeah, it was actually
So
kind of
it's
funny when I lived up in the territories during the 24-hour daylight during the summertime. We actually put tinfoil on the windows and duct taped it into place,
yeah,
just
sure.
to keep absolute blackout, right? To because or else you couldn't sleep. So,
You
which
couldn't
was
sleep otherwise, yeah, for sure.
oh yeah. So and of course
So
there's
we've got.
going
I
to be
mean, we mentioned generator use, and there's just. I mean, you almost have to take it off the table. Unless you live in like a three-story walk-up, you're not going to be able to like have a generator there, anyways. If you end up storing it, you can't store it inside, or it's going to overwhelm you. So I would say like just you can't have a generator if you live in an apartment unless you happen to be on the top floor and you can mount it to your roof.
yeah. I think if you could put like a couple of large panels in your closet, maybe run them out if need be. Get a larger solar system, you might be able to run a very small ceramic or electric heater in a closed off room,
Sure.
which might be just enough.
Or even just charge a car battery so that you can run a little 12-volt heater.
Yeah, a little buddy heater or something. Um,
Yep.
ca- catalytic heaters, like a propane powered, like the 1 pound bottle. You can get those little catalytic heaters that
Yep.
work off those. I mean, they still throw off some heat, but of course, then you have to open it, get some fresh air, which negates kind of the benefit of the. I'm not 100% on those, but that is because of the small space, it's actually an advantage in the fact that you don't need a whole bunch of heat output and BTUs to keep
Well, yeah,
yourself
and you
warm.
and you don't need to be running it all night either, right?
Yeah.
You get it warm, you keep it, you use that to keep the edge off, and then run it again in the middle of the night to keep you going. Uh, yeah, there's so many considerations. It depends on how high up you are and where you are and which way you face, but you just got to plan to be on your own. It's an indoor camping trip. You're not going
Yeah.
to have access to water. You're not going to have access to power likely. Um, you're not going to be, for me, I think the biggest consideration is that if things go south, where's the apartment, right? There aren't apartments in rural areas. You're likely right in the middle of downtown everything, right? That's why we have these human filing cabinets, is to get you closer to the action. So, I was driving the 401 through Toronto on the weekend, and you just see thousands upon thousands of people living in these teeny tiny little quarters, and you're 10 miles from the nearest green space, right? From the first open field.
hmm
That's a long way to go with a lot of people between you and safety.
Actually, from a personal perspective, I used to like eye things up in Toronto back when I lived in Ontario and stuff. The one corridor that you have to get through most of the town safely and at night, preferably, would be the big power lines they have running through right through the middle of town, kind of paralleling the 401. Just throwing it out
Yeah,
there for Toronto
yeah,
people.
you got the hydro lines there, and you got the Don Valley River too. Like you got the Don
Yeah.
River, and the Don Valley is fairly green, but like you've still got there's a lot of people, right? If you're in downtown Toronto, let's use that as an example, right? You're surrounded by 5 million people that all want what you have.
Oh yeah, and you mentioned the indoor camping trip aspect actually, because that's one of my next points. There is the fire hazards. In any sort of emergency situation, and it happened actually just last winter near our place, is that as soon as the power goes off, there's always gonna be some yokel playing with candles poorly, starting a fire. And basically, if you're in an apartment, one thing to be concerned is not yourself, but other people's misuse of heating implements, whether it be just candles or whatever, because that
Absolutely.
turns into a massive fire hazard, as you could probably attest to.
Oh, 100%. I mean, like I said, I lived in 5 apartments over 7 or 8 years, and fire alarms were just a constant thing, right? And most of those were just people leaving things on the stove. Sometimes it was a little bit more serious, but I mean, from a construction perspective, there are two basic ways that condos are built. One is that they have um, standard stick partition walls between the units that are usually double layered 5/8 drywall. Sometimes they're 2x6. They're usually insulated to help keep the noise down. Some are concrete walls all the way through. The concrete walls, you're pretty well safe. You're pretty much guaranteed. Like it takes a lot. Like, it takes
hmm
a really big fire to bring a building like that down to make that unsafe. But um, those wood separation, like those stick frame separations are, you'll have a couple of hours,
Yeah.
but it's not infallible, and it's going to get warm, it's going to get uncomfortable, it's just not going to get deadly for a while. So um, that's another, it's a thing, right? People are going to, as they get cold, as they get desperate, people are going to do stupid things.
Yeah, we
um,
actually the power wasn't even out for like 3 or 4 hours last winter. We had that 48 plus hour power outage there. It wasn't even out for a few hours when the house across the bay caught fire because the kids were playing with candles, and that was the end of it.
yep.
So the whole house
Well,
went
and
up.
that's it. I mean, I think everybody at some point in their life has been told, have a bunch of candles and a box of matches around in case the power goes out.
Yeah.
But when it actually happens, people start to panic, like, oh, I need like 17,000 candles going, because if life is not as illuminated as it is on a normal day, I'm going to die, right? The boogeyman's going to come get me.
Yeah.
So like every single candle that they can, rather than just a couple that they need, and one tips over, and all of a sudden you've got a pretty significant problem really quickly,
So I
or
guess my
one
take,
burns or one burns low.
yeah. So my takeaway from that, I think, is that okay. So if it's a short-term shit hit the fan situation, and the apartment catches fire because of negligence, then having a Bob is a must, including like backups for everything on your hard drive. But even if
Absolutely,
it,
absolutely.
but
Yep.
if it's a long-term situation, you still need a Bob because you're gonna want to get the heck out of there. So
You have to, and I mean, you made a really good point that it's not sustainable long term, right?
yeah,
You can you can be well prepared, right? If you live in an apartment and there's a storage unit in your there's a storage room in your apartment, and you can stack those shelves with cans for probably 4 to 5 weeks. I mean, thinking of the average apartment that I've been in, in my area, you could realistically have 4 to 5 weeks worth of food for 2 or 3 people. But beyond that, like you, there's nowhere to go from there. Like you can't go out and forage because there's nothing to forage. You're in a concrete jungle. Right?
yeah,
You might be able to go out and find some squirrels, but you know squirrels and trash pandas are everywhere. But there's not a whole lot of you're not going to be able to go find a deer. I mean, in my area, there are coyote like in downtown London, Ontario. There are coyotes, there are squirrels, there are skunks, and there are raccoons. But none of those are high on my list. Um, you can go through the park system to find deer, but if you're in a park surrounded by 300,000 people and you're hunting, you're not exactly going to be subtle about it. And then what are you going to do with that deer afterwards,
well, you're gonna have
right?
to share it before you finish stripping it out. So people be like, "Hey, that's a nice looking haunch you got there." It's
Exactly, right? Like by the time you get back, by the time you get back and then haul that thing up the stairs, you're gonna be in pretty rough shape. So it's not a long term solution, but it's gonna be overall it can be done. I mean, I lived in an apartment. I lived on the 25th floor during the 2003 blackout. Um, I was a first responder at that time, and I went out and I worked for about 36 hours straight. I came back, and as I was coming in the front door of my apartment building, the generator guy was coming out. He had just shut down the elevators, and he said, "I'm shutting down the generator to fuel it. It's going to be 4 hours before it's back on." So the generator powered the elevators, powered the emergency lights in the stairwells, powered the air circulation stairwells, like the smoke evacuators. So I looked up at those 27 flights of stairs, 24 flights of stairs, sorry, because there's no 13th floor and I lived on the 25th. So 24 flights of stairs with my steel toe boots and my soaked through uniform clothes. And I looked up at there and I went, that's just not happening.
oh,
And so I
actually,
went and I stayed at a friend's house.
that actually reminds me. My employer, they back in 2003, they had same power outage there. They had a backup generator on the roof of one of their buildings, but the fuel supply, for some reason, I guess the structural integrity wasn't supporting a fuel tank on the roof, so they had the fuel tank in the basement that was
That doesn't
powered
make a lot of sense. By
by
the
the regular grid. So it because they needed the regular grid to pump up the fuel to the backup generator, which was awesome. So what they were doing is they were having to take jerry cans. They would draw straws. Short straw got it. Had to walk down to the basement with the jerry can, walk up, feed the generator, and they went till they ran out, and then they had to go down and get another jerry can full. And this is like for 3 days, right? It was kind of funny, but
Well, one of the things that happened here in town is that, well, not here in town, but in London, one of the things that we discovered was that the ambulance dispatch, so the Central Ambulance Communication Center in London, they had a backup generator for their equipment, so they could still answer 911 calls and could still dispatch. The building did not have a backup generator for the AC, and the windows did not open. It was 40 degrees. So although they had a plan for one, they didn't have a plan for the other, and they ended up having to shut it down and evacuate the building anyways.
yeah. So I mean, power outages
So,
are. I think it's good being the fact that as an apartment building and it's a densely packed together area of people, they tend to prioritize the dense population areas. I think first for
yep,
power restoration, but
yep,
by the same token, though, you have less alternatives when the power is out, right?
absolutely. And I mean, so, of the alternatives, right? If you're if you're one of the last holdouts in the building, and your supplies are running low, you don't have to go very far to you don't have to go very far to scavenge. There
Yeah.
might not be a lot there, but you can scavenge without exposing yourself terribly. Another thing, and I mean, we're talking about an extreme situation, is that apartments are actually really easy to defend. There's usually one door in and out. There's usually one or two stairwell doors that are pretty easy to barricade. So if you're up on the like fifth or sixth floor and you haven't attracted a lot of attention, chances are good that looters aren't coming up that high. And if they are, you've got lots of warning because you'll be able to hear them. And if you can block off those stairwells, then you're in pretty good shape. Like you've got a really easily defendable piece of property.
Yeah,
Um,
they're not sneaking up on you.
yeah, they're definitely not sneaking up on you, and they're not getting around behind you. So while Ian is
For sure. I mean, not really.
where'd you go? Oh, there
Yeah.
you are. Okay, Ian's back. So I mean, it's
Oh,
but the flip side of that, of course, is that you also don't have an escape route if things do go really badly. So big thing, a really important thing with buildings, and Ian kind of talked about it earlier, right? Um, most apartment buildings are master keyed. That means that the building manager has one key that opens all the units in the building. If that key gets out in the wrong hands, that's a problem. If somebody wants to loot that building, it would be in their best interest. The first thing to do is go into the manager's office and open up the lockbox and try and find a master key. So I would suggest that if you do live in an apartment and sheltering in place is part of your plan for a short-term emergency, have another deadbolt. They're pretty easy to take out and install, like remove and install. If I can do it, anybody can do it. But have another deadbolt. Buy a decent quality one. A good quality deadbolt is still under $50,
actually, my
and
dad.
being able to.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, my dad on his acreage there actually had one of those 2x4 style, like medieval, like door blockers, like
Drop bars.
installed.
Yes, those are
Yes,
fantastic. Yep,
it was
they're
fantastic. So he had the the hardware from Lowe's type of thing, and he had slid in
yep,
there as a backup. So in case that somebody had the master key or cut the padlock off or whatever part of his shop, he had this basically mechanical backup that was like pick proof, so to speak. It was
yep.
pretty awesome to see.
It certainly does its job, and if it's installed properly, you don't even see it, right? And most apartment doors swing in, so you can attach brackets to the frame and drop that bar in place, and that door's not getting opened, especially if you do a couple of them. You anchor it properly, you're in really good shape for that. So I would suggest if you have the opportunity, be up on the fifth or sixth floor. Um, most fire department aerials in urban areas can still get up that high. Um, it's also not a horrible distance to rappel down. I would not suggest. I would suggest not waiting until that happens to learn how to do that. So go to the local climbing gym, learn how
How's
to
the,
do it, right? But with a harness and a rope, you can get down 5 or 6 floors without a ton of challenge.
how's that
Uh,
harness go on again?
so when reality's coming in the door is not the time for you to be learning how to go out the window. But it's not a bad thing to do. It's not a bad thing to be able to do. You can do it. But there are climbing gyms all over the place. They're popping up like weeds. It's the next big thing is what I'm told. But go and learn how to do that. And if you can go and learn how to rappel and have a rope and have a harness and be able to deploy that quickly, you can get yourself out. So that's
Yeah,
just but not you can do that from the sixth floor. You can't do that from the 25th floor.
no, absolutely not. So I guess another subject we should touch on is water supply.
Uh, so when I lived on the 25th floor in 2003 when the power went out, one of the things that we learned is that anybody above about the fourth or fifth floor didn't get water pressure. So
Yeah, so are they guys? They on like a water reservoir system, like we have the big towers where you were and stuff, or how does it work for
no,
the
it
like?
was in that particular building, it was all mechanical pumps, all electric pumps. So you had city pressure up to about the fifth floor, and then
Ah,
above that it was all pumped up.
okay.
And so when the generators were shut down and the pump stopped working, you didn't have water.
Interesting. Yeah, so here what we
So
did at the apartment here is we've got like a bunch of stored bottled water.
yeah,
Of course, but I've always said, well, that's good for a couple, maybe a week, two, three, but then you got to start thinking about how do you get more water. Well, even though I'm in the rain capital and stuff, I don't have a rainwater catchment system on the apartments because, like, actually, Raphael, when I was talking with him, he mentioned that his strata does not allow rainwater collection.
Yeah,
So,
a lot don't.
a lot don't. But if you had the tools and maybe parts handy to, like, there's a downspout that goes right by my window here. So if you
Yep,
had the tools and the spare parts available, so that when something goes horribly wrong, you've got an entire roof above you that's like 20 times the size of your apartment that
yep,
could easily collect a bunch of rainwater and it's going right by your apartment. You might as well have the ability to divert that downspout and have a
hundred
bucket on there
percent.
ready. Which is
Yep.
something for people to consider, which is actually would give it a better water collection potential than your own, like a regular house.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, the footprint of an apartment building is always bigger than the footprint of a house. And it's
Yeah,
usually a flat roof system, so it's not running off in every direction. It's a flat roof system is being directed into, specific downspouts, usually two or three of them. So
yeah.
even if you're catching a third of the water on that roof, that's more water than you're ever going to catch at home.
Yeah, and so like to complement that, I have a Sawyer water filter on the ready with the IV bag set up, so you can pour it up there, and it goes down a big tube into whatever bottle you want. So it's kind of always filtering water type of thing.
Perfect.
Uh, Alternate transport's a bit of an issue in an apartment as compared to like saying a house, because you can't just have like a Suzuki Samurai ready to go fully loaded at all times, and or whatever your bug-out vehicle is. Um,
Yep.
because storage and parking spaces is an issue because in an apartment you might get one parking space with the apartment but not two or three or four.
Yep.
So I was actually trying to think of what the ideal thing is. One of my roommates actually has an e-bike, and the e-bike
Do
is
you
is
make fun
kind of,
of him a lot for that?
I do, but
Good.
again he's the yin to my yang. He's the extra greenie. I'm the extra. What's the opposite of being a greenie? I don't know. But anyway, uh, so
Realist?
yeah, a realist. So, anyways, but it's awesome the fact that he's actually kind of sold me on it a little bit because it's got about a 30K range. It obviously has regenerative braking and you can charge the battery while you're pedaling. But
Yep.
also going up a hill and going somewhere quietly, it's quieter than the quietest moped slash four-stroke motorcycle, whatever you could possibly think of. And if you only have to get 20, 30 kilometers to alternate transport, that is a fantastic idea, actually, because I was thinking
Oh,
dual sport.
it certainly is.
Yeah,
But yeah, like a bicycle would work. Another thing, again, right? You can scavenge if things are going really south. There's going to be a whole bunch of cars in the parking lot in the parking garage.
yeah.
It's just a matter of paying attention to who goes where, what floor on the elevator when you're riding with them, and from there you can figure out which apartment has the keys in it, and away you go. Now, I'm obviously not advocating stealing vehicles. We're talking about the S really hitting the F and things going really south and you're in a life or death situation.
Well, there's a big difference
But
between
in those
stealing and
situations,
liberating, because liberating is when you actually need something to prevent yourself from dying, versus
yes,
stealing
exactly.
because you just want something somebody else has is a big difference, right?
Yes,
Um,
so you can liberate that and repurpose it for yourself, and right, you can also use that. You can also you've got hundreds of liters of gasoline that you can siphon from, right? But collectively with all those vehicles, Um, it's
well,
it's it's there's certainly an advantage to having that many people close by, but it's the exact same disadvantage.
Well, the other thing I was thinking about too is like, okay, so something you could actually hang in your storage unit, put it in a closet if you really needed to, I suppose. Or some people's parking spaces are big enough you could put the bike at the front as like a dual sport bike, so like something that's good for on and off road, that's
Yep.
licensed for the road usage, so that you can practice with it. But basically something that you can, well, judging by traffic around here, even during rush hour, let alone something horrible going wrong. I've never seen yet a traffic jam. A motorbike couldn't go along the in between traffic on the shoulder, on the left side of the road. Um,
Up the sidewalk, right?
Up
There,
the
there are all
sidewalk,
kinds of options.
across
Yep.
the field, everything else where the cars can't. And like I was
Yep.
actually just stuck the other day in traffic here, where literally if I would have just had my truck versus my car, I probably would have gone to be able to go over some grass and get to an empty road. But you just don't do it in the car, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
a dual sport bike would come in super handy in a large city where traffic jams are a thing. So
100%. Yeah, driving the 401, we got stopped in traffic, and there was a motorbike. He was just every little spot that was too small for a car was just the right size for him, and he was just zipping through like there was like he wasn't even slowing down. I was jealous more than anything. It was a really effective way to get through that traffic backup.
yeah. So the other thing I was just going to come back to as well is like we kind of touched on it briefly is that the preppers that focus on the guns versus the actual like stuff that will help in 99% of cases. There is a thing to consider too, is that we all want to have the arsenal of guns, we all want to have all the toys, but in an apartment perspective, I think you're better off just to have one or two that are actually legit, food gathering tools and whatever
Yep.
else have you, self
Yeah,
defense tools.
a good 30 cal rifle and a 12 gauge shotgun. I think you're more than, you use your shotgun. You can use your shotgun for whatever, right?
Yeah.
There are birds all over the place, and also an excellent way to defend a hallway. So
Yeah, but I mean, because not so much the fact is that you might have to carry it all out, and theft is like it's everyday theft. From just a normal ops perspective, theft is a concern. So I mean,
yep,
like when
absolutely.
we mentioned all those people accessing your apartment without your knowledge or with no notice, frankly, I think apartment preppers should really consider caching out of town for a resupply or a supply versus storing them all at your regular house. Like maybe just have that bug out location figured out ahead of time. Maybe,
Absolutely. I think
yeah.
an apartment, like if you're gonna be in place for say 72 hours, I think an apartment is a perfect way to, is a perfect place to do that. Where you don't have to go anywhere, you don't have to get anything, you just have to wait for the power to come back on, right? You just have to wait for the floodwaters to recede. You just have to wait for whatever, right? It's gonna, that blizzard's gonna blow through. The roads are gonna get plowed. You just need some time on your own. Like you just need to be self-contained for 3 days. Fantastic. I think an apartment is a perfect solution for that. Anything more than that, your plan better be get out to open country, right? You better have a plan to get out of town quickly.
Yeah, that's pretty much all I had. But I noticed you had a good one there too. Flooding. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, well, it's one of the kind of one of those spin-off effects, right? If you're up on the fourth, fifth, sixth floor, anything above that, floodwaters don't get that high.
Yeah, I mean, think
So
about the person in the average house. I mean, their basement's the first thing that gets flooded, and they're fighting that the whole time, and that's usually where most people store stuff too, right?
yeah, and so your stuff is pretty well safe from flooding. If you're somewhere in the middle, right? If you're on the roof, then like if you're on the top level, then you've got you've got the same concern of as anybody else does of your roof leaking. But if you're somewhere in the middle, the chances of your stuff getting wet are almost none.
Hmm.
So that's kind of that. It does a good job. And then another thing to remember is that you've got if you're on a if you're in an apartment, then you've got access to the roof somewhere. And I mean, if you've watched 90s New York sitcoms, then the roof is a place to be, right? You can get up there, you have access to it. If you're interior, right? If you've got interior stairs, which most new buildings do, that door is probably locked. That gets you on the roof, but once you're up there, you can probably get back down. And those are usually not terribly difficult locks to defeat.
And talk about a great scouting location if you want to actually see what's going on, and there's no or radio reception. Higher up the better.
Yep, absolutely.
A set of binoculars and a radio, you probably get a lot more info than sitting in your apartment, right, where the reception
Oh,
might not be as good.
100%. Well,
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if it's normal, but I know like on the roof of the building that I lived in, the fire department actually had a radio tower up there, and I know most places put cell towers up on the top of tall buildings because they get better reception than anywhere else, right? So the higher up it is, like there are usually antennas up there already. You may be able to, if you understand how those work, you may be able to tap into that and you know, get a signal for absolutely anything.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered at least some basics. Hopefully, we got some people asking some questions after this. Suppose we should move on to
So
the podcast challenge.
yeah, so I think this is a fantastic challenge. I think so. Find a workaround for one of your housing restrictions. So if you can't collect rainwater, have a water bob and have a plan to fill that. You can buy a water bob, by the way, at rapidsurvival.com.
Good plug.
See Eric. Also find a way to add storage to your space. One of the things that I think I read it in like a Canadian Home Handyman magazine or something about 10 years ago. They actually talked about removing a section of drywall out to the stud bays, and you've got about a 14-inch wide, 3.5-inch deep opening, and you can put shelves in there, and you can store cans of whatever you want,
As long as
or
that's not your
bags or
neighbor's wall,
whatever.
or as long as that's not your
As long as
neighbor's
that's your
wall.
neighbor's wall, and I was actually going to qualify that by saying don't do that if it's part of a fire separation, but if it's an interior wall, then you can do that and end up with a little cavity there where you can add, you can pile cans in there. So that's something that you can, it adds a few more inches, a few more vertical feet to your day, and can open up some space for you, so you can have a few more cans of goodies, keep you safe for a little while longer.
Yeah, and while I guess that mostly applies to apartment people, but I mean that could still work out to people in regular houses too. Like if you've got instead of like a freehold, like a strata condition of a house, I mean it's the same idea. Just try and use this podcast challenge to work around some of your restrictions.
Absolutely. And then, yeah, if you've done something, let us know. Send us an email, feedback@prepperpodcast.ca, or find us on. You can leave us a comment on the YouTube channel. You can leave us a comment on our brand new Facebook page. Is that a
Ooh,
thing yet?
it is a thing.
It is a thing, yes. So there's a brand new Facebook page, so you can leave us a comment there. Let us know. Let us know what you've done. Share some pictures if you're so inclined. Ask questions, whatever you like. We love to hear from you. So that's our challenge out to the masses. So find something you can do to improve your condition without building or without pissing off your neighbors more than anything.
Should start wrapping things up here. Let's just cover some upcoming events. We've only got one this time, and it's the last call because it starts tomorrow. Uh,
It
the
does start tomorrow. Yeah.
the 2019 annual Preppers Meet in Desboro, Ontario. It's July
If you're
11th.
not on your way there now, you're going to miss it.
Probably more than likely. And I have to apologize to Jay if he is listening, but I tried to arrange like a quick interview for it. But next year, we'll have it all squared away in time to give him a good plug for this. But anyways, July 11th to 14th at the website is annualpreppersmeet.com. So shoutouts.
Shoutouts. While I was traveling last week, I met a young lady named Nova. She moved from Vancouver to a small port town on the Atlantic because she didn't want to be in a big city when things went south, in her words. So we didn't have a huge opportunity to chat about that, but I have a huge amount of respect for that. She was thinking well ahead, and I hope she's a prepper, and I hope she's listening. And Nova, if you are listening, thank you for the fantastic service from me and my family. We really appreciate it, and we will be back again to your facility.
Right on. I've got one for listener Sean. So under the banner of It's a Small World, we were both on the Stop the Bleed class at the charity shoot, and we ended up getting talking. And he goes, "Hey, I'm actually that guy that sent you that gunroom pic." So like he maybe remember from the
Cool.
podcast, he had the coolest gunroom pic ever he sent to us, and he also was actually asking for constructive criticism on his individual first aid kit, like an IFAC. And he
Yep.
literally had the most squared away IFAC kit I've ever seen in my life, other than like from an
Nice.
actual first aid instructor or a company. Like this guy was just, it was amazing to watch. It was just like, oh man, I'm so far behind the eight ball. And it was perfect just to fit on like a Molly rig or anything else. And it was just like no BS, no Hello Kitty band-aids, just the meat and potatoes, like the tourney, the chest seal, nasopharyngeal NPA. I can't say that out loud right now.
Nasopharyngeal airway. Yeah.
Thank you. And he had it all, and the trauma shears, just meat and potatoes. It was awesome. So
Perfect. Awesome.
yeah, iTunes reviews. I had a couple. So I've got one
We had a
feedback
couple.
from listener Benny. Benny's been on the other podcast as well, but he mentioned the fact that if you have a 2-in-1 CO detector, if it's on the ceiling, it's not going to detect any CO till it's way too late because CO sinks. So
CO. I was taught that CO is neutral buoyancy.
oh, okay.
So if it's coming out of your oven, for example, and it's 3 feet, your oven's 3 feet off the ground, it's going to stay about 3 feet off the ground.
Oh, see, I thought it
But if your
sank.
air is but if your air is circulating well, then it may reach. But it's still a good idea to have them separate, right? Have your CO detectors and your smoke detectors separate. Less likely either one of them is going to fail.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, because I was kind of I thought I was told it was stank for some reason, but maybe that's just carbon dioxide, maybe not monoxide.
Carbon dioxide is heavier than air, but carbon monoxide, I believe, and I will gladly stand corrected because this is something that I just learned recently, is neutral buoyancy. So it'll stay kind of wherever it was, unless it's being pushed around by forced air.
Oh, okay, cool. Also on the note of the podcast for charity shoot, I got an email here from Jason Phillip, and he was the guy that organized this year's podcast for charity shoot, and he's a guy that's a resident to Alberta, and I got a funny story about him afterwards here, but so just a quick email I'm just gonna read out loud because he wanted to reach out to everybody that was involved. So he said, this email isn't really enough, but I don't want any extra seconds to pass before I reach out. The simple act of pre-purchasing your ticket helped my team with the organization of the event and got you on a watch list, I'm sure. Uh, you contributed to our success, and from the bottom of my heart, thanks. I'm glad you were able to be on the stage at the event. Unfortunately, we're not able to capture the usable audio, so we'll not be sharing any files from the evening, which is probably my biggest regret of the evening, he said. That's actually, I'm kind of glad because I may have had too much to drink. But anyway, I will be
I
publicizing
would be
the
shocked to learn that.
yeah, I'll be publicizing the final donation amounts when we have the funds collected and we do the final check presentations. I will have a write up done soon. A few details about the podcast or charity shoot. We had over 35 volunteers from 10 organizations helping out. 5 podcasts were performed by Jason to plug it, as well as participation of others in promotion and sponsor participation, including us. Dinner was sold out, the pig roast, with more last minute demand than they could actually handle, which was good. They had 200 participants at the range, including all the spectators, volunteers, and shooters. And Downrange TV was their shooting film as well, which was kind of cool.
Cool.
Every region and province in Canada was represented by donation or attendance, and we had participants from Canada, USA, Germany, New Zealand, and Israel that we know of. So please reply to
Nice.
this email if you'd like to participate in a post-event survey in order to improve future events. Kind regards and overwhelming thanks from Jason. So,
Well, that's fantastic.
yeah, and anyways, just to back it up, his actual goal was to raise $10,000 for the Big Country Anti-Violence Association and the local animal shelter. And
Mhm.
interestingly enough, he thought he was going to end up short, but one of his customers just folded out a bunch of brown-colored bills and made sure he made $10,000. But then one of the things they sold at the auction, a guy resold for like a huge profit and donated that back,
Oh
and
wow,
they exceeded their goal by a large margin, which was awesome. And
fantastic. That's great.
yeah, like Gavin himself alone with a Stop the Bleed class, I think raised about $500 for the charity. So just by doing the regular course fee, and he's donated it all back. So Gavin himself is responsible for a good chunk of that, which was pretty cool.
Nice.
And interestingly enough, they had a silent auction and a live auction, and we didn't know it until the actual moment had happened. But it turns out Jason Phillip is an actual auctioneer. So
Huh.
we started doing the live auction, and of course, we've got a bunch of normal people lying around, and you didn't think it was be that lively. Well, Jason takes it to his full-on auctioneer mode, and it was actually a sight to behold. It was to the point where he actually had to slow down and tell people what the actual bid was sitting at. And make sure they want to continue on with the actual bidding. He goes, the current amount is. It was awesome. Anyways, it was too bad. It was a pretty good podcast, I thought. But unfortunately, they lost the audio. I don't know what happened there, but maybe next time for sure.
Oh, well, we live, we
Did
learn,
you?
right?
Yeah. So did you have any feedback as well?
I've received no feedback aside from I laugh too much, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
So I've got nothing to contribute to this at all.
Right on. Well, I'm going to bring episode 28 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Please help us out. Take a few minutes to submit a review. It helps other people find us. You can also find us at prepperpodcast.ca and now, like Alan mentioned, on our Facebook page. So just search under Canadian Prepper Podcast.
We do record these shows live on YouTube chats. If you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Canadian Prepper Podcast. Click the notifications tab. That gives you an alert when we are going live. You can also contact me directly via Instagram at PPSWO.
All right. You can reach Ian directly by emailing me at theislandretreat@gmail.com. You can also find me giving my 2 cents worth on Canadian Patriot Podcast, also available on iTunes and YouTube. There you can find us exposing more government waste, squirreling off on the odd firearms-related banter, and generally airing our grievances online versus at the local watering hole.
Perfect. Please check out rapidsurvival.com. You can find Eric there on the live chat if he bothers to show up. Lots of really cool gear there, including water filters and water bobs. You can also get Eric at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca. That will get any one of us. Eventually, it will all filter out to us. So, love to hear from you. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you don't like, and we'll either completely ignore you or we'll bring it up on air.
Right on. So thanks for joining us, and tune in for the next episode when we're going to be wargaming the concept of 2 days until shit hit the fan. What would you do? So until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
And keep learning.